All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Jeff Quatraro. It's July 11th, 2024, and we're at Linfield University in McMinnville, Oregon. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
You bet, Rich. My pleasure.
The first question, as we usually start, is why wine?
Why wine? Well, I think for me, first it was food. And I was lucky enough at a young age to know exactly what I wanted to do. I always felt sorry for younger people, whether my kids growing up or their friends or even people I knew when I was growing up who got in later stages in life and always were saying, gosh, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I want to do with my life. I don't know what would interest me. I was lucky. At a very early age, I was singularly focused on being a chef. That was my passion, and I was lucky to have a passion. So I was exposed to really good food at a young age, and also to wine. So wine, I was no stranger to wine when I was young. My grandparents immigrated from Italy in the early 20th century and settled in Akron, Ohio. And they got a house eventually, a nice house, a big house, and the house revolved around family. And my grandmother was probably still to this day, I consider the greatest cook I ever knew. And my grandfather made his own wine like a lot of Italian men did. And down the basement, there was, the typical Italian basement. There was the food cellar, all the canning in the jars, and the oven where grandma, and the table where grandma made pasta and everything. And then also off to the side was the wine cellar. And my grandpa actually even built a grape press into the basement floor. And so every year the train pulled into Akron from California, and they went down to the train station and bought boxes and boxes of grapes, and probably Zinfandel and Muscadel, these types of what Italians were drinking in those days. And then he would destem the grapes over the barrel and ferment, and he had about 3 barrels of red wine down his basement. But so I was no stranger to wine, and wine was it was nothing special to me or out of the ordinary because it was at the dinner table when we were kids growing up. When we had big family get-togethers, Grandpa's wine was on the table. But I was more interested in Grandma's food. She was the greatest cook, like I said before, and the food just kept coming. It was amazing, and you would have, your antipastos, and then your pasta, and the meatballs, and the sausages. She baked the bread. She made the pasta from scratch. It just kept coming, and then when you think you're done, down the basement she would go and bring out the roast chicken with the roast potatoes, and it like I said, it just kept coming. And I just couldn't get enough. So food was a big part of my early life, and I was very fortunate and grateful for that. So as I got older, even in my teen years, I had a friend who was working at a steakhouse, and they were looking for some help, and so I went to apply with him one day and got hired into a very, very fancy restaurant.
Where was that?
This was outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And it was a Hilton hotel. And I mean, linen, silver service, tuxedoed servers, the whole 9 yards. And I was hired in as a busboy. And that didn't last very long before the food and beverage director said, "You need to get back in the kitchen." So I went back to the dish pit. So my story is similar to so many chefs that you may have talked to or listened to over the years, where I just started in the bottom and worked my way up. There wasn't a culinary school in every state or every city back then like there is now. So basically your schooling, your study was to work at the best restaurants you could, work for the best chefs that you could, and absorb as much knowledge and technique as you could, and then move on to the next one. And so I think you've probably heard that story many times from aspiring chefs. And that's what I did. I got out of the dish pit, started working prep, moved my way up. And then this hotel was bought by a steakhouse chain back then called Brown Derby Restaurants, steakhouses. It was a small chain in the Midwest. Not small, they did pretty well. And I worked my way up to broiler cook. Broiler cook in a steakhouse is a very powerful position. You become, if you're good, you pretty much become, irreplaceable. So I worked my way up to that, and I was running broilers when I was 19 years old in a steakhouse that would do 500 dinners a night or more. And the concept was you come in, you sit down. There were big families, whatever. You sit, the server went around, got your drink orders and your steak order. And then once you got all that, there was a salad bar. So you went through the salad bar. And we had every cut of meat, prime rib, lobster, all that. But the broiler cook stood over a hot broiler all night. And to be able to get through the end of a night and do 500 or so covers and not get a steak come back, or maybe a one or two, do the whole night, you were pretty good. So anyway, I started to develop a passion for the excitement of the business, the adrenaline rush that you get, going through a whole night of doing this. And so from there, I went to work for a gentleman named Joe Giacomini, who was one of the best restaurateurs that area had ever seen. And he was outstanding, and he had very busy restaurants. And I really started to move up in learning different techniques. I was a saute cook in a restaurant doing 900 to 1,000 dinners on a Friday or Saturday night, making everything from veal to scampi to tournedos to, everything was made from scratch. Sauces were made a la minute in the pan. So I was just gaining a lot of knowledge throughout my early 20s. But Ohio kind of started to have its limitations on the kind of food maybe I wanted to cook, expanding my horizons, and then also socioeconomic conditions. Where it was in the Rust Belt, and then I think we had the blizzard of 1977 or 78, and I said, I'm out of here. And so I had some friends that had moved out west. My brother was going to school in Arizona. I had enough motivation and contacts to, it's time to hit the road. So I headed out west, and I spent a few years in my 20s going from place to place and getting jobs when I wanted to and moving on when I wanted to.
Did you have a desired, you obviously knew you wanted to be a chef. Did you have a desired place or type of restaurant, or something? Was there a goal you were reaching for at that point?
There was. I always loved seafood, even as a kid growing up in the Midwest. I was a big fan of seafood. So to hit on that point and continue with where I was going, I in late 1979, I came to Oregon, to the Portland area, and I started looking for work, and there was an ad in the paper, and they were hiring for a new restaurant being built at the Greenwood Inn in Beaverton, and that restaurant was the Pavilion Bar and Grill. And the Greenwood Inn was owned by the Stevenson family, and that's important. I'll touch on that again in a little while. But they built this beautiful restaurant, gorgeous glass ceiling, gazebo style restaurant, huge fountain in the middle of the dining room, green plants all over, ferns, everything like this. Also had what I had never seen before was an open kitchen. So you cooked behind this long bar that had high back stools at it, maybe 6 on this side, and then you had the window area where the servers picked up their food, and then 6 more on this side. It was beautiful. No expense was spared here. And so I got hired in there, and we opened in December of 1979, December 1st, 1979. And the chef was very good, and he was British. And those two things don't always go together. And but he trained in Italy. He worked on the Queen Mary. He had worked at the hotel, the Del Mar Hotel in San Diego. He worked in San Francisco. He was good, and he taught me a lot, and he taught all of us a lot. And he followed the Escoffier, and he taught the Escoffier. If any of the cooks didn't know it, he'd tell you go out and buy it and bring it in, and I'm going to teach you all about the sauces and the preparations and knife skills and everything. And so this wasn't just volume pumping out steaks, blah blah blah, but it was good and well known. It had a great reputation in the area, and we boned out our own Provimi veal legs and made pasta from scratch and all kinds of seafood preparations. We used the veal bones for stock, and then demi-glace, and then making your mother sauces, and it was a really, really professional operation for Beaverton in late 1979, going into 1980, 81. This was a big time, and we had a really strong reputation. Well, what's significant about this is that shortly after we had been open, maybe in the early 1980 or so, and our reputation had grown pretty fast. One week, we got this buzz from the maitre d' comes back, and he's all abuzz. He said, "We have a reservation this Saturday night. James Beard is coming Saturday night for dinner." So everybody was on their toes, on their best behavior, and I was lucky because, like I said, we had an open kitchen, so that night, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, whenever his reservation was, and we're all standing like at attention, and here he comes, and he was bigger than life, like you've seen or read or heard, or probably 6'4", 6'5", well over 300 pounds, and that big, bald, domed head, and just as friendly and gracious as you could be to the staff and to everybody. And so that was like, okay, we're on the map. We're on the map. He had heard about us. He needed to come check it out, and so that was fun. And it was very popular, and a lot of very well-known chefs later on came through the Greenwood Inn before going on into Portland and becoming, finding their niche. So that was good, and I was promoted to sous chef there, and I was really moving along. And the Stevenson family owned the Greenwood Inn in Beaverton, and they had a Greenwood Inn in Bellevue, Washington too. And they bought a property, and they were opening a restaurant, and they sent me up to open this new restaurant. And it was a barbecue concept, and I didn't want to move to Bellevue, Washington, but a good soldier that I was, I said I'd go up and get it started. And I lived in the hotel and got the restaurant started. I went up for about 6 months, I think, maybe 3 to 6 months, and got that going, and came back to the Greenwood Inn in Beaverton. But my sous chef position had been filled, so they made me banquet chef, and I was doing banquet work for a while, and kind of not, it wasn't what I was looking forward to. So I got a call from my friend in Ohio who first got me into the restaurant business, and he was working for a group now, and they had 2 restaurants, and they invested in a third one, and they wanted to know if I would come back and be the chef of this new large restaurant they were opening and oversee their other 2 restaurants. And I had been away from home for 5 years, maybe, something like that. I'm the oldest in my family, of a pretty close-knit family, and I started to have some, a little bit of like thoughts of maybe I needed to go back, and so I took the offer. They paid my moving expenses. I left Beaverton and went back to Ohio. And
what year was that?
That was in 1982, I think, 81, late 81, early 82. Took that job, and it was a big job, and it was a good job. And there was a falling out later on with the partners and the guy who had the 2 restaurants, who was kind of like the restaurant brains guy to come with these investors who remodeled this big building that was in the National Register of Historic Places. They had a falling out and split up, and I stayed with the main restaurant that I went there to open. And while working there, I met a beautiful young lady, and I she's now my wife, and we just celebrated our 40-year wedding anniversary last month.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
I met my wife at the restaurant, and so we got engaged. But before we got engaged, I said to her, honey, I want to tell you something. You need to know this before we get married. I want to go back to Oregon. And she said, that's fine. If that's what you want to do, that's fine with me. Her family had moved to Florida already. She had no more family in that area. And I just fell in love with Oregon. I missed it so bad. And so we got married in June of 1984. And 2 months later, packed up my Suburban and drove cross country and came back to Portland. So, no, she had just graduated before she went to that restaurant from Beauty College in Columbus, Ohio, and so that was her trade. And I said, I'll get a chef's job, you'll get a hairstylist job. We'll be fine. And that's what we did. We came back. I'm going to go back to the Greenwood Inn and the Stevenson family, because while I was gone, the couple of years I went back to Ohio, the Stevenson family bought the Heathman Hotel in downtown Portland on Broadway, renovated that hotel, and put in the Heathman restaurant, which was one of the best restaurants in Portland for many, many years. So the Stevenson family were a lumber family from Stevenson, Washington. They had unlimited funds, and they had built the Pavilion Bar and Grill at the Greenwood Inn. Now they grew to bigger things. So when I came back to Ohio, I talked to some contacts, and I thought, well, I might be able to, I'll know some of the people at the Heathman because they're the same ownership, right? I even somewhat knew the owners. So I went to the Heathman to apply for a job, and Greg Higgins was the sous chef at the Heathman. And I interviewed with Greg, and we hit it off really well. And so he had me come back and do a stage a little bit, work in the kitchen for a while. And he said, I want to make you my lead person on AM shift. And he was really, we got along really well. He really liked me, and I liked him. But he wasn't the executive chef. There was a Swiss gentleman that was the executive chef, and I don't remember his name. And so I go, well, you got to interview with the chef. Okay, so I come in, I interview with the chef, and he's fine, but I think he was deferring to Greg. If this is your guy, that's your guy. I'm fine, So I hired in. It was an hourly rate. You had to park on the street. There was no parking. So you'd have to run out every couple hours and plug the meters or whatever. And it was okay. I thought, hey, I got a job. I'm back here. I've got a job. And I came in to work after a few days, and Greg calls me over, and I had short crop black curly hair and a short crop beard. And he said, the chef wants you to shave your beard. And I was like, are you kidding me? I went through 3 interviews with you guys. I already started working. Now the chef wants me to shave my beard. I said, tell you what, no thanks. I'll see you later. Good luck. I'll go on my way. To follow up on that story, I heard a week or so later that chef had locked himself in the storeroom with a shotgun and was threatening to blow his brains out. And they were able to talk him off the cliff and get him out of there. And Greg Higgins was promoted to the chef, and the rest is history. So I said, well, I got to find something else. And in 1980, we moved back in 1984. We got married in 84. And in early 85, I was hired as the executive chef of the Coode Street Fish House. And Horsemaker's one of his restaurants. And it was a demanding job, and it was good. It was absolutely the best seafood restaurant in Portland, without a doubt. And I can say that to Jake's Crawfish with plenty of knowledge, because Marcel Lassan, who was the executive chef who I got to know later on at Jake's Crawfish, would walk down to the Northwest 3rd and Cooch and walk in to see what we were doing. All the fish was brought in whole. Everything was butchered from a whole fish. We had a fish display case that people could see when they came in. We made Dungeness crab sausages. We made all the sauces, and the demis and the fumets and everything were made from scratch. We were only open for dinner, and I worked 75 to 80 hours a week. Yeah, and there was no breakfast or lunch. So you come in the morning and, work all day in the prep, and your chefs would come in, and then, the servers were in tuxedos. You had the girardons, every meal was served with the silver cover, and it was outstanding. I learned a lot there, and a lot of influence. And at that time, Horst had started his Horst Mager Culinary Institute, which later became Western Culinary Institute, which later became Le Cordon Bleu Institute. But he was really focused on that, so he brought in his cousin, I think, to kind of oversee the restaurants. And he had probably 5 at that time. He had more than that at one time, but probably 4 or 5 at that time. So, anyway, over time, Horst was, the promise was that you're going to be a chef. You're going to pay your money and come here for, 16 months or 12 to 16 months, and you're going to be a chef when you graduate. Well, a guy with a culinary institute that's graduating chefs and owns 5 restaurants, guess what? The promises came true, because he started replacing his chefs in his restaurants with his graduates, So I was one of the dominoes that went during that. And I know other guys that at Tivoli Garden who lost their job, and others that, you got to place these people somewhere. So that was that. From there, I was hired as a sous chef at the Multnomah Athletic Club, the MAC Club, and I was there a couple of years. And I always had this feeling as a chef that if you really want to, I guess the pinnacle of what you could do as a chef is to have your own restaurant. You could work for somebody else. You could get the paycheck every week, every couple of weeks, maybe not, whatever. But their name was on the board. It was them. It was their place. It was their place. You were doing the work, but it was their place. And I just always had this feeling that if you really wanted to make your mark as a chef, you got to have your own place. You got to be the guy. The buck stops here. You got to make a profit. You got to pay your employees. You got to pay your taxes. You got to pay your vendors. You've got to create good food. You have to have kind of both sides of your brain working. Your creative side, your chef side, and then your business side. So when I was at the Multnomah Athletic Club, I started to really get the urge. Well, I kind of skipped a part, but back in the day at the Greenwood Inn, and even then the Coode Street Fish House and that, I had my first Oregon Pinot Noir. And I'll never forget it. It was like, this is made here? This is made here, yeah. And I told you we had the British chef. His name was Dave Yates. And I remember he would say to us, we have to get down to McMinnville and find out where this wine's coming. We're going to get a group and go to McMinnville. So, I was always like, I never heard of it. I don't know what it is. We get on the road, we go out to the country and find it. We never went as a group, but I did. And so, at any rate, so that stuck in my mind. If I was going to have a restaurant of my own, I want to go to wine country. And it was early, in the business, in the calendar of the Oregon wine history. This was pretty early on, but I looked, and I was pretty motivated, and that's what I wanted to do. And this came up for sale, Augustine's restaurant above the Lawrence Art Gallery, and I thought to myself, for a beginner restaurant, this is the right size. You can really have you can have your hands on everything, and it was small, but it was by those standards out in the middle of nowhere, But I didn't fear that too much. I knew we read through the prospectus and that kind of thing, and there were 20,000 cars a day going by, but you're on the highway halfway between Portland and the beach. And you have more than one business. It wasn't just me. The Lawrence Art Gallery was established. They had a gallery in Salishan. They had a gallery, I think, in Lake Oswego or something. So, and then you had the Oregon Wine Tasting Room. And the genius of Myron and Patrick McGilligan and Myron Redford from Amity Vineyards to be the first, and for a long time the only place that served a variety of Oregon wines. Most tasting rooms you had your own wine, that was it. But here you could go and you could taste through, so the three of us had a symbiotic relationship, if you will, where, we all kind of fed off of each other. The Lawrence Gallery could get one car to stop by and buy a $20,000 piece of art. But you're going to drive by an empty building a lot. So, but with the tasting room and the restaurant, there was more traffic, more cars in the parking lot, more people coming through, more word of mouth. So it really helped everybody. So we bought Augustine's restaurant in 1987.
What was it when you bought it?
It was Augustine's restaurant. It was a couple that were school teachers, and they wanted to try something new. Let's get in the restaurant business. And then shortly thereafter said, okay, let's get out of the restaurant business. It's pretty demanding work. So I was on a tight budget, so I didn't go through and change the name. And I would change all the advertising then, and change, your listings and everything that, that would. I felt like it might be easier just to keep the name the same, from a financial standpoint, and so that's what I did. I was, new to the area, but I had all my influences that I had accumulated over the years, and my menu was pretty similar to. I had a lot of seafood. And just kind of people always ask me, what kind of cuisine did you say? And I hate not trying to coin this phrase, but I did used to say seasonal regional cuisine. My idea was to take the bounty from the area and then prepare it according to the season that we're in. We got so much spring run Chinook salmon, Dungeness crab in number 10 cans, we had halibut, swordfish, sea scallops, and then I had steak, and I do a pork tenderloin with a Pinot Noir plum sauce and different things, trying to just a lot of berries, and made a hazelnut cheesecake that was very, very popular. So I didn't have a lot of history in baking, but I wasn't going to be able to get a pastry chef, so I taught myself. And so we had hazelnut cheesecake. Our chocolate sin, it was called. It was a flourless chocolate decadent cake. We did fruit tarts. We did apple pies, fruit pies. I had a good group of people, and they believed in what we were doing. I had a real good group for a long time that were on board with what we were doing, and I think everyone felt excited and doing that. But I got to meet so many of the early winemakers, and the first generation. And Yamhill County Wineries Association would have their quarterly meeting at different restaurants in the area. So Nick's, of course. There were different restaurants around, and they also would come out to Augustine's and come out. So I had a lot of real regular customers. Dick and Joan Erath were very regular. Myron was there a lot, of course, because he owned the business downstairs. So it was nice to also be engaged in kind of a business relationship with Myron also, and Vicky, his wife, Vicky Weddle. So at any rate, I can remember coming down here. We opened in 87. IPNC started in 1987. Domaine Drouin came in 1987. Argyle started in 1987. Don and Wendy Lang at Lang Winery came down in 1987. It was kind of like, I don't know why, but so this thing happened in 1987. And I'll tell you a quick anecdote about Don and Wendy. Were good customers, and I used to go up. Don would invite me up, and back when they first started, and he was showing me what he was going to do. This is when they still had the tasting room down like this day basement of their house. You'd go in the sliding door, and then Don would have his guitars and his CDs, and he'd play music, and we had a good relationship. And so Don's son and daughter, Jesse, and I don't remember his daughter's name, lived with their mom in California. So in the summer they came up for a while, and so Don and Wendy Lang brought in Jesse and his sister, and Jesse was an excitable boy. He seemed like full of energy. He was probably around 9 or 10 years old, and I remember one night he was, being a 9 or 10-year-old, so we said, "Hey Jesse, how'd you like to come back in the kitchen and wash dishes?" Yeah. So we put an apron on him, and he came back, and he was very into it. He was back at that dish machine washing away, and I come out to the dining room. I go, he's going to be there a while. He's getting into it. But now what is he? Second generation. He's running the winery, and I haven't seen him in a long time. But those are the kinds of stories that were happening back then. It was a lot of fun. We made a lot of friends, and I really also had I was in the perfect spot to learn about Oregon wine and wine in general, and meet winery people, because I became real good friends with Patrick McElligott down at Oregon Wine Tasting Room, and everybody knew Patrick, and he knew everybody, and he knows his wine inside and out, and and so I would go down and just pretty much have class with him, in dead time between meal service and that, and just we'd go through wine, and he'd tell me about the regions and the varietals and the clones and whatever. So I mean, it was awesome. It was educational at the same time. We came down here in 1988, I believe it was, to IPNC one day. Patrick, myself, a couple of people, and then our friends who rented a house just off campus. And it was we went through a lot of wine tasting, and it was 95 degrees, 95 to 100 degrees, and we were wasted. We went back to our friend's house, and we just all sat on the couch, and it was so hot, and they didn't have air conditioning, and their 2-year-old was screaming and crying, and because he was hot probably and couldn't get any relief, and we were like, oh my God, it was nuts. So we did have hot weather over the years back then too, not like today, but that was nuts. But we did a lot of catering. We did a lot of catering over at Yamhill Valley Vineyards. Ken Patton from Hewlett-Packard was a big supporter of ours. Came in with the group from HP a lot to our restaurant, or they would hold parties at Yamhill Valley Vineyards and ask us to cater it, and they were just 2 miles down the road, whatever. So we did a lot of catering up there. Steve Carey was there, David and Dennis, and David Rice was the tasting room manager at Yamhill Valley Vineyards back then. I think you might know him from.
We interviewed him.
Did you really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. So we did a lot of that, and I will have to say though that one thing that we'll never forget is the greatest harvest party in Yamhill County in those days was the Knutson Erath harvest party, and it was epic. It was legendary, and a lot of the restaurants in the area set up food booths, and ours was always right next to the Steel Drum Band from Seattle, but it was good, and we set up our words. I mean, I remember, I probably have pictures of us. I think I do. My wife would help me with that, and the two of us and our kids laying on a blanket behind us, or probably 5 and 3 or 6 and 4 or something like that, and doing that. And then they had a little gal, and she was like a ballerina and into yoga and that, and she would gather all the kids, and she had this streamer on this stick, and she'd dance through, and the kids would dance behind her like this. And then at the end of the day, it was the limbo. They brought out the limbo stick, and I think I have some fractured vertebrae from that still today, but it was always just a blast. And I would go around to the house, in front of the house, and there might be David Adelstein sitting there, maybe Bill Blosser, Sokol Blosser, David Lett, Dick Erath, Myron Redford, that may all be sitting out on the front, just laughing and talking and having a good time. So those were fun times.
What was different about having your own restaurant versus working for someone else? What were the biggest differences?
The biggest difference, obviously, was the fact that everything fell on your shoulders. You were responsible for everything. There was, you had a commitment to the community, to your employees, to your vendors, to your family. Everything rests on your shoulders. You need to be disciplined, which not many people would describe me as disciplined, but it was it's probably more stress than it would be if you knew one day you could walk away from a job if you didn't like it, or even if you got fired, well, I'll go find something else. But you walk away from something like that. You didn't consider it. So the biggest difference, I guess, was just making the amount of stress. That's a big thing. But the rewards are bigger. The rewards are bigger. The disappointments are tough, but the rewards are much bigger. You say, I did it, I can do it, and I can have a product that people come back over and over again. And you have my guest book. You saw what that's like. It's many, many, many pages of, and I remember when Rich and I were having a conversation early on, and I brought him obviously volumes of newspaper and magazine articles and everything like that, and he was saying, this area was off the beaten path, nobody knew about it and everything. I said, no. I said, I got to bring you my guest book. There are people that signed this guest book from all over the world, all over the United States. And I'm not saying they were all coming here for the Oregon wine industry per se at that time, but they were coming here for tourism, whether it was on their way to the beach or visiting the area or the wineries. But people were coming here even 36, 37 years ago. So we were making a name for ourselves then. I had a lot of great supporters in the wine industry, and later on, I'll tell you a story about David Lett. But David would come once in a while down on a Saturday afternoon between lunch and dinner when nobody was around, and he had a little red sports car, and so he would like to drive out in the hills and love this area so much, and he'd pop in and have a late lunch, a sandwich or something, and I had the opportunity to know him and sit and talk with him, and we rarely talked about wine. He talked about his car or the country or how are things going here, and I like what you're doing and that type of thing. And it meant a lot. And I mean, there's so many others that I'm sure I got to sit here and name everybody that we got to know, but it was good. It was good. So in 1996, something changed in the early 90s that was a real sea change out here for us, and that was the casino. The Spirit Mountain Casino was built probably in the early 90s, I think, and that really changed the dynamic of the road, of the highway. It became busier. It was harder to get off and on the road. You had more motorhomes, and you were competing with a $6.99 all-you-can-eat buffet, and that type of thing, and so that started to change for us. We had a little bit of back and forth with the landlord over some things and so my lease came up in 1996 and I didn't renew it, and I just said I think it's time to call it a day, and so that was a traumatic decision. We liquidated the restaurant, and my wife was probably going, so what are you going to do now? And so what I did was I went back to Portland. I had plenty of contacts back there, and I went to interview with Bill King, the executive chef at McCormick & Schmick's, and I had known him from my days working in Portland, and so he said, what do you want to do, Jeff? You want to? And having been an owner, chef, I wasn't just focused on the menu and the restaurant and the food and everything like that. I had to take care of everything. So I kind of was, And I didn't want to be, I didn't tell him this, but I think I did tell him this. I didn't want to be a chef at McCormick Schmidt Jake's Net. It's kind of formulaic. A lot of stuff comes down from the corporate headquarters. This is what you're going to do, and this is how you're going to make it. And I said, so I'll go to the front of the house. I'll manage. And he said, okay, that's great. So I started at Jake's Crawfish, worked with Doc Wilson as the wizard, yes, as many people did. I did pretty well there, and so they had Jake's Grill, they had McCormick Schmick's on Oak, they had the Harbor Side down on the waterfront. So when the busy season came at Jake's Grill during the winter, they had banquets and they had all this stuff. They said, hey, Jeff, we need you to start next week working at Jake's Grill. Oh, okay. All right, worked a busy season through winter there, and then summer comes and he goes, yeah, Jeff, I think we'd like to have you go down to the Harbor Side and work down there in summer, where you had all the huge outdoor seating, and the restaurant had steps up and down. It was packed. They had the bar there. It was nuts. And so okay, I'll go down there and work, and every time it was like, the next GM job becomes open, we got it pegged for you. We got it for you. That was the carrot, and the stick, and I did that for a while. And a guy who was a regional manager for McCormick Schmick's, there was a new restaurant company coming into town. They weren't new. They were out of California. It was called Piatti's. And they're still going this day down in Mill Valley, California, Sonoma, Healdsburg, that kind of area. And they had expanded north, and they opened a spot in Seattle, at University Square up by the University of Washington. And then they took the old Trader Vic's spot in the Benson Hotel downtown, and Trader Vic's had gone out of business, and Piatti went in there. And this guy recruited me to come and be the general manager. And so I left McCormick Schmidt and went there to be the GM. It was a beautiful space. The food was good. The concept was good. There's just one small detail. They opened up one block down the street on Broadway from Pazzo, which was one of the best Italian restaurants in Portland at the time. And I don't know, I didn't think of it. I went, yeah, I'll take the job. And we had a good business for a while. It wasn't unusual for people to come in for their reservation for Pazzo and say, party of four, Jones, sorry, you're not on the book. Is this Pazzo? No, this is Piatti. Pazzo's down the street. Oh, okay. Well, so I did that for a while, but I want to tell you a story about when I was working at Piatti. I was the wine buyer. Wherever I was, if I was the manager, I was the wine buyer. If I was the food and beverage director, I was the wine buyer. And but I wasn't a monarch. Anybody who was interested in helping me, especially my servers, because they're the ones who ultimately are out there serving, selling your wine. They were more than welcome to join me. I'd say at 3:00, this distributor's coming, Lemma's coming in, or so-and-so's, or this winemaker's coming in, and feel free to come in on your own time if you want to join in. Anyway, I had a guy working there, one of our servers, his name was Tom Bean, and Tom was well known in the wine business. He was a wine guy. He was a wine enthusiast. He loved wine, and he was knowledgeable about wine. And so I would say to Tom, Lemma's coming in at 3 today if you want to come on down and go through the wine. And Tom went on to be an instructor at Western Culinary Institute. He was well known throughout the city and throughout the wine industry, and he's now living happily in Hawaii. But one day, it was between shift, and a man and a woman came in the restaurant, and they had a stack of paper with them. And I said, can I help you? And they said, yeah, we were wondering, we have this inventory of wine that we're trying to sell, and we were just at Martinazzi's up the street, and they're not interested, and I was wondering if you would be interested. And I said, well, I'll take a look at it. And it was typewritten, stapled papers, and I looked at this list of wine, and I was like, oh my. So I asked them if they wanted to sit down and have a cup of coffee or something. And sure, yeah, I'll sit down. And I went to the back, and between the time I went there and I went to the back, Tom Bean was in the back, and I said, Tom, and I knew that Piatti wasn't going to buy this. They had a volume of first and second growth Bordeaux in their basement from the wines were from the late 50s, the 60s, the 1970s. These were this is an amazing list of Bordeaux. And I know Piatti wasn't going to be buying $40,000 worth of French wine. So I said, Tom, I have this wine. I have a cellar. I have the cellar. If you find us a buyer, let's go in and sell this and broker this sale. And at any rate, long story short, I go out to the people and I say, can you give me about a week and let me check into this, and I think we can do something for you. Their parents owned Clock Tower Wines, I think it was called, or something like that, down in John's Landing on Macadam. And their parents passed away, and they inherited this. In order to settle the estate, they had to sell this wine, and they inherited this $40,000 worth of Bordeaux wine. And so I told him to give me a few days, and Bean went home and got on his computer and did his research and found a buyer. Red Carpet Wines out of the Los Angeles area, who are still in business today. They're known as Red Carpet Spirits and Wines, I believe, and they're big. And they were interested. So they flew up from Los Angeles, and they brought their experts, and they had their candles and their flashlights, and they were examining the labels and the boxes, making sure nothing's counterfeit or anything like that. And we negotiated a 10% brokerage fee, half in cash, half in wine. And they said, okay. So we went to this people's house in Northeast Portland, and I pulled up and I said to Tom, I think that wine is worth more than the house, but that doesn't matter. And we went down their basement. It was dark. It was temperature controlled. They had humidifiers, and it was perfect. And these guys from Los Angeles came down the basement of this house in Northeast Portland, went through everything, the wooden boxes, the cases, which I still have one in my garage, Lafitte Rothschild, Mouton Rothschild, Aubryon. There were some second growths. I had a Latour. I had a Ducou Rocaillou. At any rate, they said, it's good. It's all good. We'll buy it. Wrote a check on the spot to the sellers. Wrote Tom and I each a check for $1,000 each, and we got to go through and cherry pick our own wine. The only request they had was that we don't open any unopened boxes, and there was a Petrus there that was unopened. That was a 70-something. But at any rate, we went through, we got an empty box, and we went through, and we each picked a first growth Bordeaux from the 60s, 70s. They had Chateau d'Yquem in 750 milliliter bottles. I didn't get one of those. Those were off limits, but I did get a 375 milliliter Chateau d'Yquem, 1967. We got all these Bordeaux, and there was one case of American Cabernet Sauvignon in this whole collection, and it was Heights Martha's Vineyards 1977 cab, and I got a bottle of that. And we got our stuff. We helped them load it up. We took it down to the loading docks, or wherever the trucking company was. Helped them load them off. They each gave us each a cigar, and, or a case of wine, and a check for $1,000. And that, I love this story because I didn't do any work for that. They walked in the door. I happened to be at the right place at the right time, and we made it work. And Tom was great because he went out and did most of the work of finding the buyers and everything like that. And so that's our one great story there at Piatti. But well, I left there. I was a food and beverage director for a while down at the River Place Hotel, and that I was there a couple of years, and that was bought by a guy from Tokyo or Korea or something. The whole complex down there, and so I left there, and I came back home, and I was like, I'm tired of this corporate run around, this big job to that big job to this big job, and they're stressful, and they're all good. Salaries are good, the benefits are good, your 401k, all this stuff, but here today, gone tomorrow. And I came back home, and I bought a 1-ton smoker cooker on a trailer from pigroast.com in Georgia. Lang, I think it was not a Lang, but a smoker cooker. And I had that for a while. And then there was an ad for a tasting room help at a brand new multi-use facility in Carlton called the Carlton Winemaker Studio. And I went down there and interviewed with a couple of gals down there, and Megan Ankrum, my dear friend to this day, and Lauren Glazer. She was the manager, and I hired in there. And I was lucky enough to get in with a whole group of new, up-and-coming winemakers, winery owners, and it was outstanding. And we became still to this day friends with some. We worked with Stuart Bodecker and Athena Pappas at Bodecker Cellars, Andrew Rich, Hammaker was there, Lynn and Ron Penner Ash were there, and of course Bryce Bagnall, Bryce and Marcia Bagnall at Bryce Vineyards, and we got to be everyone became really close at the time. Dewey and Robin Kelly at Ribbon Ridge Vineyards, still friends to this day. I'll probably see them tonight. So it was just a great group, and we would not just do tasting room stuff, but we'd help on the bottling. I helped Andrew Rich on the bottling line, or at Crush, we'd do punch downs, pump overs, clean out bins. We were just kind of being cellar rats, even though I was already had been through the corporate world. I wasn't like an up and coming apprentice or anything like that. I was just having fun, and so really became close. And then we were friends with Bryce, and then when he got this horrible disease, ALS, and Megan and I also became caregivers for him. We'd go down and help Marcia at his house so that she could get out of the house and go do what she needed to do, or just so she could go away. And Bryce never lost his sense of humor. He was always hilarious, even to the point when he was in his chair and he had a screen and it was directed with his eyes, and it had a artificial voice on it, and he'd be telling jokes, cracking us up, just telling jokes, and he was just a wonderful, wonderful guy. Interesting thing about Bryce is that he was a wonderful winemaker, and he opened a bottle of Syrah for us one time. This is before he got sick. Willamette Valley Syrah, not Rogue Valley Syrah, not Columbia Valley Syrah or Walla Walla Syrah. Willamette Valley Syrah that he made from Duvera Vineyards. And I happened to see Mike Green at this year's Yamhill Carlton spring wine tasting, and that came up, and he remembered it. Mike said that wine was outstanding. I said, it really was good. And it was the first Willamette Valley Syrah that I had seen. I know that Duvera Vineyards has Viognier, I think, and maybe, they're doing some other varietals that aren't Burgundian, but yeah, Bryce made an amazing Syrah from Duvera Vineyards. So, and Mike and I talked about it, and he recalled it just the way I did. It was beautiful, beautiful wine. Amazing. So yeah, that was a fun job. I was at Carl Winemaker Studio. I was also doing some caterings with my big smoker cooker. I call it Grapevine Catering. I had a business card. Tell them you heard it through the grapevine, and we did caterings at wineries, and we had some fun with that too.
What year would this have been?
This would be 2002, 3, 1, 2, 3, something like that. Okay. In between there. One day I was working in the Carlton Winemaker Studio. I'm in a room, and two guys came in, and they're looking around. They want to look at the facility, and they're looking around, and they introduced themselves to me, and one was Steve Sweeney, and the other was Jeff Meader. And so they talked to me for a while, and then they went and did some things, and then they came back over, and Steve said, we're looking, I want to open a wine bar in Tualatin. I was wondering if you'd be interested in maybe coming up, take a look, and tell me what you think, and this and that. And so I said, sure. And he and Jeff were good friends. And so Steve had a concept of Parallel 45. There was a wine bar in Tualatin along what that lake is there behind the hotel, Century Hotel, and that. And he had a beautiful spot, and he had done a great job. He got some reclaimed wood that was turned into a beautiful bar top, and the place was beautiful. And he said, if you'd be interested, maybe be our chef and our wine buyer and whatever. And he hired me and Eric Berg. Ricochet, right. He had been working at Domaine Serene for a while. So So he hired me and Eric. Eric was buying. He told Eric he'd be the wine buyer. He told me I'd be the wine buyer and the chef. It didn't matter. But to this day, Steve has told me numerous times and told other people that he felt that I put him on the map. Because when I had come from Yamhill County, I had all these connections. So I had all these people coming up to sell Steve wine, and then I organized winemaker dinners. I had a winemaker dinner with Dick Shea. I knew Dick from when I was buying wine from him downtown Portland. I had all this stuff, and the place, and he had some outdoor seating along the lake out there and the pond, and it really was going well. It was a hot spot. And one thing I did that I was very proud of, I had started to get to know Jason Lett from when he was started in his winemaking career, and he didn't go right to work for his dad. Obviously, he went and did some other things, and he had his black cap label with Bishop Creek wine. So I don't know if you remember that, and he was making that wine, and he was doing pretty good. And so I got to know Jason, but I had known his dad 20 years before when I had Augustine's restaurant. So one day, Jason had brought some wine, and we were having the black cap wine and this and that. And I said to him, Jason, what do you think? How do you think your dad would feel if, like, you bring your Bishop Creek black cap wines here to Port 45, and we asked your dad to bring some Irie wines, and you guys do it kind of a tasting together? And he said, I don't know about that. And I said, well, how about if I ask? He said, if that's what you want to do, sure. He said, I'd be all for it. And so I think I went through Russ out at Irie Vineyards. Russ was there for many, many years, and I knew him from years ago. And I don't think I called David himself. I called Russ. I think I had floated the idea by him. He said, let me run it by David and see what he thinks. And then he called me back later, and he said, he loves it. He loves it. So one night we had Jason Lett and David Lett pour each of their wines against each other, and David was glowing. He was glowing, and I have a picture of it. He and I and one of our servers behind the bar, and he's got this big smile on his face. He's got a glass of wine in his hand. I think he was really, really proud, and I think he genuinely had a really good time. That was good. It was going well, and I left Carl Winemaker Studio, and I did that with Steve and Jeff Meter, and got to be really good friends with Jeff, and I'll be up at his industry night tonight, up at Eminent Domain, and she's a wonderful guy.
Such a cool place, too.
Yeah, wonderful. So while I was at Parallel 45, a friend of mine that I had known for years called me. He was a sales director at Reese's Fine Foods, national sales director at Reese's Fine Foods. And I think it was 2004, he called and said, Jeff, the R&D department down there, they're looking for some culinary people. I don't know, I just thought maybe you might be interested. Check it out. And I thought about it, and I said, Scott, I'm sorry, but it doesn't sound like it's down my alley, I don't think so. Well, a year later, he called me back again, and he said, talk to the director of research and development down there, and they have a lot of food scientists, but they really need some culinary people. They can see that that's the direction the business is going, and you sure you wouldn't want to? And I go, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll talk to him. I'll have an interview, whatever. And so they called me, and I did an interview with them at Reese's Fine Foods headquarters up in Beaverton, across from Nike World headquarters, and I really liked it. And we talked a few times. We talked for a while. The interview process probably lasted a month or so, and then I was sold on it. And so I left Parallel 45, and I went to be a research and development chef at Reese's Fine Foods. Some of the things that got me were 5 days a week, 8 to 4. Weekends, no holidays, no nights, no nothing. And they're a good family, a good company, solid. A lot of people think of Reese's Fine Foods as they potato salad and burritos or something like that. But they had 12 manufacturing plants across the United States. They had a national sales team, and my division, what I would be, was with the food service division. So I was working with restaurants, and I always said they were national chain restaurants, fast casual restaurants that had 500 to 1,000 units across the United States and Canada, that type of thing. I always said it was I worked with all the restaurants that I would never go eat at, but I didn't tell them that. And yeah, it was like, the Applebee's and the Boston markets and the Outback Steakhouses and that. But it's millions and millions of dollars if you can sell them a product, or develop something for them. So they said to me at the time, everything was good. The package was very, very good. It'd be about 40 to 50% travel, and I said that's fine. And it was no less than 50%. I traveled all over the United States, a lot. I still feed off of my Alaska Airlines miles and my hotel points that I have, but it was good, and I stayed there almost 17 years until I retired a couple years ago. And, that's my story. But I guess what I'll say is that the best times for me was to come down to Yamhill County in the mid-'80s and establish something that I still meet people to this day that we start talking, whether it's at a wine event or something like that. What's your history? I tell them about the restaurant, and they'll say, I have so many times they say to me, I ate at your restaurant, it was great. And I say thank you, I appreciate that. I'm glad that that's what your memory is of it. We were able to make a lot of good friends down here in the wine business and kind of grow with it and watch it grow and be a part of it. And I feel that, and I'm proud of that.
That's really cool. Yeah. I have a couple questions I want to follow up on. I want to start with the research part because that's really interesting. Tell me about the role you play as a culinary person in that kind of food research. What is your role? What are you actually doing on a day-to-day basis?
What I'm doing, for the most part, we had to tasked with coming up with develop new items for the company. But the biggest part of my job was to go with the sales team, and they had a national sales team, and I was glad that I was in the food service division. So I was dealing with corporate chefs of these big companies, as opposed to the majority of Reese's businesses in retail, and I didn't know anything about grocery shopping. I didn't know. My wife does grocery shopping. I don't know anything about grocery stores. I get lost in them. So I was lucky enough to. I think that's what they wanted me for, is to work with the food service division and their sales team, their national sales team, and go and meet with these chefs and show them what we could do for them. Because you got to understand, I think you do, that they don't make all of their food back there. So they buy a lot of prepared foods. The majority of their entrees, center of the plate stuff they make, but Research had 2 potato plants, one in Pasco, Washington, and one in Topeka, Kansas. They make millions and millions and millions of pounds of mashed potatoes, cut potatoes, diced potatoes, red, like hash browns, shredded potatoes. So, you could go and you'd go to these companies and say, well, instead of you having a guy back there peeling potatoes and mashing potatoes, man, you can buy ours, and ours is as good as yours or better. And then, so I would go along and help the sales team with that, do demonstrations, maybe take their menu items with our products and put them together and show, they go, geez, we could do that. And 500 units we have, and and really you're pinching pennies then. 2 cents a pound between making it or whatever is millions of dollars. So that was my main role, is to work with them, and so I went all over the United States doing that. And it was fun. It was fun. Travel takes a toll on you. Anybody will tell you that. And you might say you work, Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, but when you got home, when you travel 3 time zones and come back, and then the next day you're doing something, and you're like, I don't know what day it is or where I'm at, but it was good. It was good. For the most part, it was really good, and they were very good to me, and they were very generous to me when I retired, and nice gifts and travel package and things like that. So I have nothing but great things to say about the Reeser family and company.
So let's back up to Augustine's for a second and tell me about how putting a restaurant in wine country and having access to the wine and wanting to showcase the wine, how did that change your approach to food, and what were some of the things maybe you were proudest of when it came to sort of wine and food pairing?
That's a great question, because that became a real passion and a hobby of mine was pairing food and wine, and doing winemakers dinners and sitting down with a winemaker and them bringing their wine, and then you sit down and you're going, okay, well, I think, with your Riesling, we could do this, and then with your Chardonnay, that, your Pinot Noir, your Cab or whatever, and matching food and wine became a kind of a passion of mine. And actually, for a short period of time, I've mentioned Patrick to you a few times. I know you know who Patrick McElligott is, and most everybody in the wine business does. He's also an instructor at the Chemeketa Community College Viticulture Center down outside of Salem. And so I took classes down there. And I took classes, Wines of the World, identifying varietal characteristics. That's another class. I'm not saying it exactly right. I took classes from the legendary Bob Sogge, S-O-G-G-E, who was down there for many years. I have a wealth of knowledge and books that I brought back from them. And then I took Patrick's class, which was blind tasting. So you had wines on paper bags on your desk, and you had to identify everything from region, varietal characteristics, regions, even altitude sometimes, high altitude vineyards versus, valley vineyards. So that was a passion of mine. I'm really glad you asked about that, because learning, not just, popping corks and drinking wine, but really, really getting down to the nitty gritty of what, and through those classes, one of the main things I was able to learn is identifying flaws. And I don't think enough people know how to identify the flaws in wine, and not just oxidation or corked or anything like that, but really getting down into the nitty gritty of how to identify flaws in wine. That was I was into it. I was a geek, I was a wine geek. I wasn't just we sure enjoyed it, but I also was constantly analyzing it.
I'm curious also about your customers. Obviously, you had a decade run in wine country. How did your customers change in terms of their wine expectations or appreciation while the restaurant was open?
I think it definitely grew. I think in the beginning in the 80s, it was a novelty. This whole Willamette Valley, Yamhill County wine country thing was a novelty at first. And I think people were really interested in good food and wine. But as it progressed in 10 years into the early and mid 90s and towards the late 90s, people were more people were coming specifically for wine country. They weren't just passing through. They just weren't on their way to the beach. They weren't just here in town for graduation at Linfield or something like that and needed a place to eat or anything. It was real knowledgeable customers. A lot of people coming up from California, a lot of people from the East Coast who were coming out, and so yeah, I think I brought you one of my wine lists. I thought I did, and I committed from the very day one at our restaurant that we were going to have an all Oregon wine list, and we did. And I think you saw some of the names that were on that list, and it was. There's some that aren't with us anymore, and some that still are, which is really remarkable. But I think on some of my early wine lists, a glass of Riesling or Chardonnay was $2.95 or something like that, wasn't it? So it's come a long way now, $20 a glass. But as time went on, people were coming here specifically for the wine, so they were a more sophisticated buyer, and. I, at that time, still really enjoyed matching food with wine. So our servers could say, if you're having this entree, I recommend this glassware or this bottle or whatever. That will match your wine. And so we did a lot of education.
After Augustine's, and before Reeser's, in that stretch where you were working and doing a lot of wine buying and things like that, tell me how you saw the industry change in those days and how much of your focus was on Oregon versus Wines of the World at that point.
When I was in Portland and working in restaurants in Portland, we had Wines of the World, Okay, and so, but what I noticed when you're working with a restaurant, a hotel, or something like that, where it has a bar, let's say a bar that's got a hopping bar scene, and then you've got your dining room and pretty sophisticated dining and stuff like that. I learned early on that as a person managing a wine list, you need to have two separate. You need what I call cocktail wines in the bar. People are just getting off work. You know, the ladies say, need a Chardonnay. It probably needs to be oaky. It probably needs to be, that kind of thing. But when you're having your diners who are going to have wine with food, they're a whole different clientele. It's a whole different thing. So you need to adapt your wine list and your glass pour program to satisfy both sets of customers. So that's one of the things I learned in managing wine lists and wine programs for large companies. And they both serve a purpose. There's nothing wrong with either one. You just got to know the difference and know what wines to have in what program.
So what's the number one key or main key of building a good wine list besides that?
Making sure you can identify good wine at a good price point. So I mean, you can't, you certainly can't lose money on your wine program. And a lot of people do. A lot of people they have a really nice wine and they put it out there and they're charging, $10 a glass when it should be $15 a glass or something like that. But diversification for sure. I really think, knowing that people are going to want some. Like I said, the bar program, they're going to want a fruitier wine, probably a more fruit-forward wine. They're not really concerned about matching it with food, or maybe if they are, they're having bar snacks or something like that. So fruit-forward wine's probably a little bit more in your bar program, but with your meal program, your dinner program to make sure, and your lunch program, to have wines that have that pair better with food, maybe a little more acidity to it, a little more longer finish, that type of thing. I think that would be the big thing. Reading your customer, knowing your customer base. Give them what they like, not what you like. Because I know a lot of people that are the wine directors, and they'll be like, those idiots, they don't know any better. So they can go next door, or they go down the street if you're not going to give them what they want, So that's important.
So, in what ways? Obviously, you were in the Oregon wine country as it was starting to pick up, as you said, 1987, big year for Oregon wine. A lot of things happening in that part of the decade and into the 90s. What were the biggest changes you've seen to the industry, besides obviously just pure size? How has the industry changed in your eyes, and what, I guess, how do you keep tabs on it now? What's your relationship with Oregon wine now?
Well, I can't consume as much Oregon wine as I would like to anymore. And so I still have friends in the business. I still see people like I will tonight at an industry night. But I can't keep up with it. It's crazy over the years that, you just go out and see more and more blue signs and more wineries. And that's good. I mean, I'm really happy that, there's still growth here, because in a lot of regions in the country, they're stagnant. There's not a lot of growth. And still, in Oregon, it keeps growing. So I don't keep up with it as much as I would like to. And at one point after I retired, I thought maybe you should try a couple of new wineries a month or something like that. And, I have, and I've gotten to know it. But I think one of the things that I'm concerned about, and I'm sure that everybody is, especially after going through a week like this, is that I'm really happy that I was here when I was, and I had some great wines. When those winemakers were learning and trying all the time, the vineyard managers and what's going on in the vineyards, and it was constantly, it wasn't always a good vintage every year. We all know that, but it kept getting better. But I'm just so worried now about the future with a climate crisis, and how long will Pinot Noir be viable in the Willamette Valley in 20 years or 25 years or so when I'm long gone. I wish people, I hope the future generations are able to still enjoy Willamette Valley and Yamahill County Pinot Noir like we did. And I told you the story about Bryce, long time ago, Bryce Bagnall making that Syrah from Duvert Vineyard. And they were starting to already, experiment with Rhone varietals and Bordeaux varietals and that type of thing. And in 20, 25 years, will Yamhill County and the Willamette Valley be known for making the best Rhone varietals in America, as opposed to Burgundy varietals? Maybe we'll make the best Grenache and the best Syrah and that type of thing, the best Viognier. I don't know. I think the horse is out of the barn as far as the climate goes. I don't see how it's going to be. Every year now, lately, we've had the hottest year on record, and then the next year's the hottest year on record, and then the next year's the hottest year on record. Well, at what point does it get to the point where our Burgundian varietals no longer work here? I don't want to sound gloom and doom, because we're still having really, really good wines in the last few vintages. I love a lot of the 2021 vintages. I'm starting to have some 22s that taste really good, and so, there are a lot smarter people in the vineyards and the wineries than me that are making great things happen, and I just hope they can sustain it. That's my biggest worry.
Last question for you. What's your favorite meal to cook, and what wine do you pair with it?
Wow. That's so hard. I cook so much. Seafood is still my favorite. I cook a lot of regional still at home. I still have a lot of Italian influences on my food, so I'll cook something, maybe a seafood or, pork or something like that with an Italian influence, and I'll still drink red wine, and I'll still drink Pinot Noir, and one of my favorite food and wine pairings is a nice roasted salmon with a Pinot Noir. To me, it's the best. When I went to the Viticulture Center in the Eola Hills, and one of the things we had to do was write about our best food wine pairing, and I off the blue. I mean, because to me it is. I chose oysters on the half shell with Sancerre. To me, that's still just the perfect. If you have a good Sancerre and a good fresh oysters on the half shell, there's no better pairing. But for me, I still drink. In my cellar right now, I don't have any white wine. So, and it's not that I don't drink any, because I have some in the bin. But I age. I'm lucky enough. I lay down my wines for a while, and I've been lucky to taste a lot of old Oregon wine lately through my friend who has an amazing cellar. So it's not unusual for us to drink a 28-year-old Pinot Noir, and they're still good. And so Pinot's my favorite wine by far.
Perfect. It's good to have good friends with good old wines. That's something I got to work on. Thank you so much. All the questions I have, anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't cover today that you wanted to cover?
No, Rich, I really, really appreciate you asking me to do this, and I'm really honored, humbled that a guy who closed his restaurant 28 years ago is still able to come and sit down and talk about the old days. And I could go on and on and on, but I don't want to ramble and bore you. But I appreciate you reaching out to me.
Absolutely. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And actually, you reached out to us first, and we appreciate that. This is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story, taking the time to be with us today, enjoying this more normal summer day in the Valley today.
Yeah, for sure.
And we'll let you off the hook.
Feels great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.